We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, dear listener, welcome back. It's episode 263 of the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast. Lots of things to talk about this week. I am Trevor, aka the Iron Fist. With me, as always, Scott the Velvet Glove.
G'day Trevor, g'day Paul, g'day Warren, g'day listeners.
Paul the 12th Man.
Greetings, Earthlings.
And was the beer sponsor.
Hello, everyone.
Right, episode 263, beginning of year 6. The world is still topsy-turvy out there. There's lots happening.
Are you expecting it to right itself soon, Trevor?
No, I'm not. I'm expecting lots of strange things to keep happening, I think, for the time being.
Well, the more that happens, then...
The more we've got to talk about.
Well, the more we've got to talk about, what that's going to do, though, is the more batshit crazy stuff that happens on the right, that's going to force the left to actually take a long, hard look at themselves. And maybe they'll get back to what they should have always been about, which is the economics.
Maybe eveventually. There's so many distractions.
There's no batshit crazy stuff happening on the left, is there?
No, not much.
There's a hell of a lot happening on both left and right, actually.
Let's briefly look at the economics. I didn't mention this in the notes, but I was curious.
Economics?
Yes.
What's that
It's
about?
so important, people. Yes. Economics. So how bad are things out there? And the answer is bad, but not too bad. So according to the Reserve Bank, the Australian economy is expected to record a contraction in GDP. Now, GDP is a terrible number. We've already done stories on that. But it's the best we've got for the moment, and it's one people recognise. But a contraction in GDP of around 10%
Wow.
over the first half of 2020. Total hours worked are expected to decline by around 20%, and the unemployment rate is forecast to rise to around 10%. So a couple of things there. So the GDP is going to be down 10%. Work hours have declined by 20%. That's good news. We're working 20% less, but GDP has only decreased by 10%. There's a good story nobody's told.
I think that might be missing some details.
I know, but it's a broad... There's
very
lies down my statistics. I've tortured some data until it's confessed to what I wanted, all those things we've talked about. But it is...
This is bringing the whole thing about what it's bringing to light is that there has been productivity increases over the lifetime of this last 10, 15 years. But salaries have not gone up the same way productivity has. You know, they've flatlined.
We need a measure of the overall success of an economy rather than talking about individual numbers. They need to be able to combine it
But
somehow.
GDP is taken to be that number. As flawed as it is, that's the number that economists and the Reserve Bank and
that's
politicians
just a measure
quote.
of production.
Well, it's the output of a country.
Yeah, but
And-
to Scott's point, if your output of your country is going great guns, but everyone's poorer as a result and no wages aren't increasing, well, then...
Yeah, well,
And
then
if
you've got median...
Inflation's through the roof.
Then you've got median wage
interest
levels, and
rates.
you've got other statistics that measure the median wage, the average wage, the wealth of the different sectors. I mean, we've got those statistics. You can look at them. But I just thought two things. 10%. In any business, like it's quite possible for a business just to strike a bad year and suffer a 10% loss. Like 10% isn't a big number in the scheme of things, despite what a amazing event this whole thing has been. Really, 10% is something that any business or a country should be able to manage. There should be enough fat in the system, enough rearranging of resources that you can cover a 10% downfall. It's not such a big...
If I were a vegetarian, I would resent that last comment.
Right, fat in the system, yeah.
But
Are
I'm
you
not,
saying
so
the
it's
media
okay.
are overblowing have overblown how bad everything is at the moment?
I'm not saying the media necessarily. I'm just saying that it's a statistic I dragged out and looked at and thought, well, really, that's not so bad. And I mean, it's people as well. I mean, we're all prone to be a bit with doom and gloom. So 10%, it's not that bad.
So it's
in the scheme
10%
of thing.
down on GDP. And
Yeah.
what was the 20% again?
And our working hours, total hours worked, have declined by 20%.
Couldn't it be that some industries are less dependent on physical labour and yet produce shitloads of money for the country, like mining, for example?
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
So
Could be.
it could be that the mining industry is not particularly hurt by the COVID crisis, but
Yep.
ordinary people on lesser jobs are very much hurt.
Yeah, it could be very uneven in the whole scheme of
Very
things.
uneven,
But as a country as a whole, the numbers show we've become perhaps more efficient to work 20% less but only reduce output by 10%. And in the scheme of things, 10% isn't that much. So, you know, it's not great. Nobody would want it, but we shouldn't be,
We shouldn't be opening up our veins for it.
yeah,
You know,
put it that way.
it's not that bad.
And that's the current situation too. That's not projecting forward. That's
Yeah, and that's a guess by the Reserve Bank as to what's happening. So,
economists are historically bad at forecasting.
yes, yes. So, but anyway,
Well, so what they're predicting a 10% retraction in the whole year, are they?
well, that the 6 months, the first half of 2020, will be down 10%
No worries.
for that 6 months. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
So
all right.
to see whether or not we go positive with the September quarter.
See how things turn out. Anyway, the other thing is, of course, Melbourne is in a spot of bother compared to the rest of Australia. Sympathies to our Melbourne listeners. And it seems to be that the sort of quarantine breaches that were happening with the hotels, with what was going on there, it sounds like that was a super spreader event, really, and that nearly, perhaps, a huge majority or almost all of the current outbreak could be traced back to those hotel outbreaks. So when we did our episode on comparing countries and lockdowns and all of that, one of the factors that we were considering in trying to work out why some countries perform better than others was you can get unlucky with a super spreader event. And to some extent, Melbourne got unlucky with a super spreader event, it seems to me. So we'll see how that pans
Stay
out.
away from those super spreaders.
So did some of those people in the, rather down market high-rise apartment blocks,
Yes.
did some of those people come back from overseas, stay in the nice hotels in the city and then get taken and then go home to their apartment blocks carrying,
Or it
the
could be
virus?
that the security guards who are naughty boys
lived in those tower blocks?
or associated with people in those tower blocks and it transferred that way. So we haven't been given the details, but this inquiry that they're having down there is already making noises that a lot of them can be traced to, a lot of the current outbreak can be traced to the poor management of that quarantine sort of hotel arrangement. So
Did you get to the bottom of the drug bus?
no,
problem?
no.
Still remains a mystery.
No, didn't get to the bottom of that one, Jimmy. So,
Sorry, I brought that up.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
I won't be able to sleep tonight.
No. Okay, so now the topic is, I think, people are starting to think, well, are we talking now about suppression or elimination of this virus in Australia? And what should we
Remember flattening the curve?
Yeah, so
We're talking about flattening the
yeah,
curve.
so what should we be aiming for? It seems to me that people are coming around to we should be aiming for elimination.
Really? Is that possible?
Yes.
Really?
Well, even with the Victorian outbreak.
Yeah. I mean, Queensland effectively has reached elimination.
Really?
Well, we had one. We had.
We haven't had any recent positive tests, except there was just one, wasn't there?
Yeah,
There
but that
was-
was
there
from
was
somebody who
one.
came from
Yeah,
overseas.
yeah.
So there's
But I
been
mean-
no community transmission in Queensland for...
But it's impossible to say for sure that there's just no virus out there.
Well, it's impossible, but it looks on the face of it that it has actually been eliminated in Queensland.
Really?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Okay. Until the next positive test.
Well, it could transfer across the border into Queensland. But New
And then
Zealand...
The question is, if you do eliminate it, do you keep your borders closed indefinitely
Yeah.
to any region in the
And-
world where it still exists, and
Yeah.
I don't think that's actually a practical.
Well, here's the thing.
Path
If you're
forward.
aiming for suppression, so elimination, let's go really hard and get rid of the virus entirely from our shores.
As they did in
And
New
then,
Zealand.
and then we can open up all of our restaurants and bars and have casual sex whenever we want to.
Can we?
Yeah, indeed. Or suppression, where we recognise there's always some out there, and we always have some measure of social distancing and other laws in place. Now, if you talked about just before, well, if we go for elimination, our relationship in terms of other countries and bringing people in, was that what you were saying was? Something like
Yeah.
that? Yep.
Yeah.
But that would be part of a suppression strategy anyway. Like if we were doing suppression, we would still be basically banning Americans coming in by the plane load. Let's face it. So our sort of relationship with other countries in terms of international travel, whether we're aiming for elimination or suppression, probably isn't going to be that different. Is it?
No, I mean, I can't see how it's going to work to, keep... You wouldn't be just keeping Americans out. You'd be keeping a whole range of...
What we're doing right now.
And you'd have to
And
ask
what
the
New
question.
Zealand, and what New Zealand is doing right
but
now.
it's not sustainable.
No, I don't
Well-
think it's
well-
sustainable, and you'd have to ask the question then, well, why not apply that to other types of pathogens?
Well, before we go on,
Because this pathogen is incredibly virulent.
Is it?
Yeah, it is.
It's not.
We've been told
It's not incredibly virulent.
It's not...
tell Americans that.
Scott, it's not Ebola.
I know it's not Ebola.
No, that's the death rate, is Ebola.
Death rates it's a very different thing. The death rate and that sort of stuff is
So
extremely
what does
different.
virulence refer to?
Oh, I don't
con-
know. I
it's
thought
con-
it
how
means
contagious
how
it is.
contagious it is.
Okay, well,
and it is
okay.
extremely contagious.
Okay, then it is. Sorry.
Yeah.
I take that back.
No worries.
So it's herpes.
Hey?
Herpes is extremely contagious.
Is it? Have you guys
Yeah.
been checked?
Coleslaws?
Yeah, coleslaws.
Who's had coleslaws?
I had coleslaw for dinner.
We've all got, that's a herpes
That's
virus.
virulent?
Yeah, but
Extremely virulent?
that's herpes.
It's not very
simplex.
deadly,
That's
or-
herpes simplex 1, which you get around your mouth. Herpes simplex 2 is where you get south of the border. Now that is
What's he talking about, Trevor?
Well, I think he's trying to make sense of where you got. I think
I'm
let
trying
them
to
make
make
their
sense-
argument
yeah,
rather than put words in
okay.
their mouth, Scott.
okay. I'll
Like,
let them go. Yeah.
but you seem to be. Here we go. The difference is elimination and suppression, and really, what we'd be doing between those two things isn't a lot different in terms of. It would just be a harder and longer crackdown to get to elimination, whereas and in many ways perhaps easier, because once you've done it, you don't revisit it every 3 months when there's an outbreak.
Really?
That's the idea of elimination.
Oh, that's the idea in principle, yes.
So that's what New Zealand is basically looking at. So New Zealand is looking at a situation where they won't have a Victorian experience because they got rid of it entirely. Why are you doing this?
Because I just
New
I
Zealand
just
had a
can't
case
see how
on the 19th of July.
a micro
Yeah,
but
that was
that's
someone
from
that
people who
came
come in
from
at
overseas.
can
from
be
overseas.
eliminated.
But when you know that it's come in from overseas and they're in a hotel and they're quarantined, that doesn't count. That's the whole point. We're talking about community transmission here. So can you see that? Would you not prefer like New Zealand, for example? Do you think they did the wrong thing?
I think that remains for history to be judged in the future. I don't think we really know enough about it to
You
say
couldn't-
that it's been
Yeah, but
successful.
I think
On the face of it at the
on
moment?
the face
On
of
the
it,
face of it, yeah,
looks
but
very
it's-
successful.
Yes,
right
but
now.
this is what are we into it? 4, 5, 6 months into the crisis. I don't think we'll have a really clear picture of this until 2 or 3 years down the track, frankly.
Well, but okay, but when you look at when you compare football, right? Over here, they're beating their chest because they're going to allow 10,000 people at ANZ Stadium to cheer on the Broncos or whoever the hell is it? No, Suncorp Stadium. Suncorp Stadium. They're beating their chest about having 10,000 stadium attendees there.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, in front of the Super Rugby over there, they have 50,000 45,000 people, 60,000 people that are
Already?
out already,
Oh,
because they have eliminated community spread.
okay.
But doesn't it make sense to you that if you manage to eliminate it, then within your little bubble of Australia or New Zealand, you can carry on life as normal pretty much. Whereas if you're just on suppression, then you get these blow-ups in different areas where you then have to crack down, release, it doesn't make sense to do elimination if that is actually possible.
If it's in fact possible, yes.
But it's been proven to be possible in New Zealand, and it's been proven to be possible in Queensland and other states, Western Australia, South Australia. Why do you say it's impossible?
I just think it's too early to say that it's definitely been eliminated from Queensland or New Zealand.
Well, there's an outside chance that there's somebody with it. But
Yes.
on the face of it, it seems to have been eliminated.
I think more
So-
than an outside chance, but that's just my
Well,
opinion.
you're just speaking off the top of your head. Like
I
you're
am.
just. Whereas when we're looking at the testing that's gone on, every time that somebody's been tested, they've proved negative, except where we say, oh, you've come from overseas and you're in that hotel and we thought you might have it. So you seem very sceptical of what seems to be on the face of it pretty apparent that for the moment it's been eliminated, and it'll now take an event of it crossing the border for it to enter Queensland. But you just don't buy that.
I think it's too early to say, to be honest.
But if you're testing and you can't find it,
Yeah.
then
You haven't found it yet.
right, but maybe it's not there.
Maybe it isn't, and maybe it is, and you just haven't found it.
And it's just not practical to keep borders closed forever.
Right, so
And short of
You've only got-
testing
you've
every
only got
single
so-
person,
You've
Is
only
it-
got to keep the border closed until you've got a vaccine. Now, according to Donald Trump, we're going to have it by the end of this calendar year, which I think is a load of shit.
Yeah.
But they were all talking about 18 months from go to having a vaccine. We're 6 months through it now. Outside chance we're going to have a vaccine in 12 months' time. Then it's going to probably take 6 months to manufacture enough of it to get out there and do away with it in the community wholeheartedly. So 18 months from now, I don't think there's going to be a problem.
From what I'm reading, we're never going to have a vaccine.
Yeah, but you read a lot of...
he reads
very-
all those
crazy stuff.
negative
Yeah.
journals.
No, you do read a lot of negative stuff. Well,
I'm with Warren. I have to say, I heard one biomedical type scientist saying that making a vaccine is actually very difficult for something like this.
I know that.
This is a
difficult.
coronavirus.
And
We've
he
had-
said-
we've
he
had
said-
we've had several coronaviruses already,
Yeah, he said
and
it's not at all sure.
there's no vaccine for any
So-
of the previous existing coronaviruses.
it's
The
not gonna be
common
easy.
cold is a form of coronavirus.
That's right.
Exactly.
It's not going to
They've
be
not
easy.
developed a vaccine
it
for
may
the
not happen.
coronavirus.
But just
And
because
how
you-
long's the common cold been around?
Well, it's been around since
And what would be
dawn
the
of time.
financial incentive for someone to come up with a vaccine for the common cold? And it hasn't happened.
You'd think there'd be a strong one, wouldn't you?
They didn't develop a vaccine for the Spanish flu. It burned out.
when you say burnt out, what do you mean?
Well, by 1919, that pandemic was over.
Yeah, but when you say burned out, like it didn't burst into flames, what do you mean burned
So
out?
burned out is a theory that they're talking about now. So we've talked about flattening the curve. So burnout now is akin to like a bushfire going through a
It
forest.
doesn't sound very pleasant.
No, it doesn't.
And it wasn't for the people.
No.
But
1919.
But basically, it ran through the population, and people had
takes out the
some,
vulnerable.
and there was just a limited number of people with a natural immunity who survived.
Yeah, and there were a small percentage of the population that were vulnerable, and we're
So-
always going to
So let's get this.
succumb to either the coronavirus, COVID-19, or influenza, or something else.
Okay,
So,
so-
I think in the terms of New Zealand, they're just delaying the inevitable.
Right. So New Zealand's delaying. What would you do if you're in charge of New Zealand? That different to what they're
Mi-
currently doing.
Migrate.
I think the Sweden approach was a good one.
So if you're Prime Minister of New Zealand, what would you be doing that is not being done now?
Well, if I'm the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I'm at the mercy of the media.
No, but
So-
what would you be doing? You say they've done the
Ignore
wrong
You've got
the
to keep
media.
the media.
You say New Zealand's
onside,
done the
or
wrong
outside,
thing
you're
or is
outside,
doing the wrong
out of a
thing.
job.
What should New Zealand be doing that they're not doing?
I think New Zealand should be taking the same approach as Sweden.
So should they be I don't know. Are you saying that they should be allowing plane loads of people in now to New Zealand and not
Yeah, I think they should open the borders.
and
yeah.
should they be quarantined or just let them in?
I haven't really thought that through, but the strategy is to protect the vulnerable. That would be the crux of my strategy.
But I just want to get this entirely clear. If you're not happy with what New Zealand did, you think they should now they shouldn't have gone for elimination.
Well, borders are open in Europe.
Yeah, so New Zealand should open its borders and allow people in and not quarantine them.
Yeah.
And just let it look after the people in the nursing homes.
Protect the vulnerable.
And
not just the nursing homes, but the people that are susceptible. So
and why
there's a number of categories
why
of
should
high
New Zealand
risk.
do that?
Why should New Zealand do that?
Yeah, why should... What's the imperative that they need to allow people in? Is it to protect their economy? Is that it? Is it the all-important economy?
It's a matter of balancing out the suffering. So
There's not too much suffering in New Zealand at the moment.
How do you know?
Well, if their economy is down 10% like ours, 10% is not much, and everybody's around drinking in bars and having a good time. Like they're actually as per normal in New Zealand, and it seems like a nice place to be.
Yeah.
So
At
if the
the moment.
economy is down 10% and everybody is living a relatively normal lifestyle, I'm raising the hypothesis that everyone's happy in New Zealand, right? Okay.
So they're just going to have a little bubble in the middle of the Pacific for ever.
As a prime minister, you could say, let's ride this out now for a year or two or three.
Really?
Yes.
A year or two or three? Really?
And let's see
how much of the New Zealand economy is dependent on tourism?
and see what happens. And see what happens, because we're not in a rush. Let's see what happens.
All those little tour company operators, I dare say, might be in a bit more of a rush than you are.
Yeah,
Well,
but the New Zealand government has underwritten them too. They have actually. They've handed out a hell of a lot more money per capita than what we have.
How's the tourism industry going in any other country?
Not too well.
Exactly. So by opening up, you don't suddenly help your tourism industry, because how's the American tourism?
They need customers.
How's the
to
American
survive.
tourism industry going? Shit, because nobody's going to America.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, but
so you're not going to improve the New Zealand tourism industry by opening it up, are you?
Oh, but Europeans are starting to travel again, I think, aren't they?
They are.
There will be customers, Trevor. I dare say there will be
Yeah,
some
but I think you
customers.
should look at Europe as the United States of Europe.
What?
You should look at Europe as the United States of Europe, or the Federal Republic of Europe,
In
whatever
what
you want
sense?
to call it. Those borders are just like state borders here in Australia and in the United States. They are
Porous.
just extremely porous. So, people travel there exactly the same way we used to duck down to Byron Bay.
Didn't they close the borders during the first
Oh, they
stages of
did.
the pandemic?
They did close the borders during the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. But I think that now that they have opened them up, people are they're just doing domestic travel within their own country.
Can I just, in the chat room, Julia, thanks Julia for your notes in there. She said in Queensland, it's 54 days since the last community transmission, and elimination would be measured by 2 incubation periods, or 28 days in the case of COVID. So, so that's a good sign. When you've got, massive publicity saying to people, if you've got a cough or a cold or symptoms,
Or sore throat like me, go
get
and
tested.
get tested. Yeah.
Everybody knows to get tested. And in 54 days, nobody has been tested positive via community transmission.
Can we just take a moment, though, to reflect that a month or two ago we were talking about flattening the curve. That was the goal, to make sure that our health systems weren't overrun. It then changed to getting on top of this, whatever that meant. And now it's elimination. I just wonder,
but the point
what's
is,
the next? What is elimination? And then once we've achieved elimination, what's the new goalpost?
Don't you think that that's probably a reflection of how well we have handled
Exactly.
the virus.
Yeah, it
because
is.
we have avoided the worst of it. Because when they were first looking at this,
We
apparently
didn't know
they
what
were,
we're dealing with.
they were
Yeah.
shitting themselves. They were looking at casualty lists. And they were predicting up to 100,000 people dying, which would have been absolutely outrageous. Now they have
The modelling was outrageous.
yeah,
But it
they've-
makes sense.
outrageously wrong.
It makes sense to move the goalposts as you get more information and you look and you go, actually, we can eliminate this. So
Okay.
that's why people go from,
we can
we've
eliminate.
got to at least flatten the
we can
curve.
eliminate lots of things.
But you're taking it as, it was flattening the curve and now it's elimination. And what next will it be? As if that's a sinister thing. When if you were to
No, I'm just saying, let's take a moment to
yeah,
reflect on the
but I
fact
get-
that those goalposts have changed a significant amount. That's all I'm saying.
yeah,
Trevor.
but there's a hint of
Don't read too much into what I'm saying. Just take it
Well,
at face value.
well-
I'm just saying. A couple of months ago, we were talking about our ICU departments being overrun, and I think we got to about 4% of maximum in New South Wales at the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, but taking into account everything else you've said as a whole the implication seems to be that it's somehow a bad thing that we've changed our goals, that it's something to be wary of.
The implication seems to be, but that's not the implication. Trevor.
Well, then let's take it as a positive that having got more information and more experience, we look at it and we go, actually, it might be possible to eliminate this.
yeah, so
We can change our
let's
goals. and-
eliminate some other strain of virus next, because we did it for coronavirus. Why not do it for something else?
The common cold.
Yes,
we have done
great idea. It worked for COVID-19.
Is that a negative thing or a positive? I can't work it out. Are
Well,
you
I'm
saying
just-
that as a positive or a negative
We've
thing?
got to
'Cause
find a happy balance at
I'm-
some point.
I'm
Like,
reading
why
between
have
the
we,
lines
Why
that
have we
you're not
never
happy with
tried
that.
to eliminate any other viruses?
But are you
for
saying that in
this
a
method?
negative way or a positive way?
I'm asking the question.
we
but-
have
but you-
tried to eliminate HIV ever since it first came onto the market in the 80s.
We should have done that with HIV, shouldn't we?
Well, we have tried.
Lock down borders and
We
put
did-
people into isolation
was
and
no-
quarantine. And
There was no point with
we
that.
might have gotten rid of it by now. Stop people having sex.
There was no point going down that road
Are you-
because it was only transmissible during sexual intercourse.
Or we
Now-
could have stopped people having sex, Scott.
No, that's not practical. Now,
We're talking about practicality now.
what you've got is you had a very successful public education campaign where people didn't consider having sex without using a condom until PrEP came on the market, which is a pharmaceutical barrier to HIV. Now, I don't know what the states are now, but I can't imagine that. I can't imagine the whole thing about condom use has gone down dramatically.
Yeah, I just know that HIV killed about 35 million people
Yeah.
worldwide.
And now we're up to how many million dead? Or how many are dead now?
600,000.
Yeah, 600,000 from
and,
COVID.
and we're
in
a long
6
way from
months.
the end of this.
In 6 months, you've got.
We're not a
600
long way from the end of it. Not according to the data.
Oh.
We're approaching the end of
How
it.
many are infected in America?
A lot,
How
but
many?
there's
What
there's-
percentage?
The deaths is what counts.
How many people? What
anybody
percentage
know?
of Americans are infected at the moment?
Does
I don't know
anybody
what
know?
percentage, but it's
Well, then
rising.
how can you say we're not at the end of it?
Because rising infections is good, because that means that it's not as deadly as we first thought it was going to be.
two different situations there. The first statement was, we're not at the end of this. And if, for example, in the United States, where it's just running rampant, only 10% of the population is infected, then there's a long way to go.
Oh, what's your definition of the end, though? Eradication.
There's a long way to go in this crisis. So this crisis has a long way to go, is what I'm saying. We're not even halfway.
Because there's a lot of people infected.
There's a lot more to be infected. So there's still a lot of people uninfected who will be infected. So I'm saying this
not
crisis...
not everyone's susceptible for infection.
I didn't say they were. I'm saying there's a lot more. We're not halfway, is what I'm saying. So here's my proposition.
We're not halfway in terms of the deaths.
The crisis...
I'll bet you're a beer.
Of
That's a
of
cheap bet.
I didn't talk about... I'm talking about the crisis.
Yeah.
So, and we're not halfway. So I'm saying we've got a long way to go.
And quantify that.
In terms of time or what?
Or number of infections?
Number of
or
infections,
deaths
we're not
or
halfway.
Number of infections, right?
Yeah,
But
not halfway.
But who cares about infections?
Well, it's important
Well, I
because
think
if
that-
you allow infections to get out of control,
Yeah.
then you overwhelm the health service, and
No.
then you get more deaths.
No,
So this is what's
you
happening
don't
in...
overwhelm the health service.
No, that's what happened in New York.
We didn't overwhelm the health service
That's what happened in New York.
in April
That's what happened in New York.
at some hospitals, but not the whole
then-
system. The whole system wasn't overwhelmed in New York.
Well,
Certain hospitals had periods
well,
where they were overwhelmed.
I think it's safe to say the New York health system was overwhelmed by
No,
coronavirus.
it's not safe to say that.
You
People
had
were
the-
in corridors and in makeshift
Yes, in
rooms.
certain hospitals they had
And-
some really
and
bad
ICU
moments,
units
but the
were-
system, and that was probably more of a problem that the fact that they weren't transferring patients between different hospitals, because some hospitals weren't overloaded at all,
But
and
yeah.
some hospitals were overloaded.
You had that situation where they...
you
So
they
the
opened-
system,
you had
if we're
people
talking about
in
individual hospitals, yes, individual hospitals were overloaded at certain
They're
points.
piling
but
people
the
in
system
refrigerated
wasn't.
trucks, and they had no room for them in the morgues. Like, the system was overrun.
It wasn't overrun. Certain hospitals
Okay?
were, but
well,
not
we'll
the
have to
system.
disagree on that one. Woz says that the New York health system wasn't overrun.
Do you
and-
think it depends on where you're getting your information from? I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. I don't read the data that as closely as you guys, but
But you had that situation where they had to, where the New York governor said we're going to have to open up, we're going to have to use the spare beds in nursing homes for the overflow COVID patients. Now that turned out to be a disaster too, because you had the COVID patients where they're infecting the people, the residents of the
sending
nursing
sick
homes.
people back to nursing homes. That was that
Insane.
wasn't very intelligent.
No.
did they
you
also
had-
build a temporary hospital in
in
Central Park? or
They
something?
did, yes.
And they didn't use it though, did they?
Oh, I don't know.
No,
if they
not
didn't
really.
use it. It was used, but not probably to its full potential.
But one of the big
And they
problems
had a
with the
hospital
United
ship
States
that
is
they
that they're a
didn't use.
collection of individual states, and they have these individual health systems, and there was no sharing of resources. Like in France, they had trains set up so that if there was a hot spot on the east coast, they'd put lots of infected people on a train, ship them off to Brittany or some other region of France where the health system, they were sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and they were able to spread the load. And they just didn't do that in the United States very well. And they particularly didn't do that well in New York State.
We're going to have to agree to disagree and move on. But
I'll find some information on
yeah,
that.
do that. But I've seen enough already to know I'm quite confident with my opinion on that
Before
one.
we do move on, I'd like to ask because you said the susceptible people to the infection. I was wondering what category he'd mark that 30-year-old woman in Victoria that's now in the ICU with COVID.
Oh, I don't know the details. I don't know what comorbidities she has or whether she's overweight. Or
But there are exceptions, Scott. of
yeah, there's
course.
exceptions.
I
Definitely.
know there's a lot of exceptions, and that's the whole point. That's
But
why I
are
think
there-
it's,
95%
I
of
think
people are over 65 years of age.
I
and
think it's dangerous.
most of the
I think
people
it's
that die-
dangerous what you two are actually operating under, because you're saying that
I was born to be dangerous.
Yeah.
Scott.
But there's young people. There's young people die of influenza
I know there's young people that-
every year,
I
all over the
know,
world,
but-
thousands of them.
but not in the numbers that you could kill with this disease.
You're wrong.
It's not.
This is an old person's
Yeah, the
disease. This
morbidity
is
rate
this is an
is
old
not-
person's. This is a sick person's disease. It's not a young. It doesn't kill young people.
Okay.
There are exceptions.
Agree to
but-
disagree. Okay.
Yeah.
If you look at the
So-
distribution according to age and health, it's taking out.
So can I briefly summarise the Woz and Paul sort of joint
Hypothesis.
hypothesis is that that the dangers and the risks of COVID have been overstated, and that we should let it run through the population and just look after the very susceptible, and otherwise keep our economy open, because that's
Treat it like it's a very bad flu season.
right. That's your proposition, right?
And in fact,
Okay.
Sweden have had worse flu seasons in the last 20 years. I think they've had about 4
Okay. And-
flu seasons, where more people have died of the flu than have died of COVID-19 during the 2019-2020 flu season.
And you don't accept that without some substantial social controls, at least. So the counter argument is we needed to flatten the curve because there's a real risk of our health system being overrun and not being able to look after people properly and people dying needlessly.
Well, we thought there was that risk,
survived.
but we've determined now that there is no longer that risk.
No, you have, but that's not what people are otherwise saying, because the other alternative proposition to you
Flatten
is
the curve went away a long time ago. People stopped talking about flattening the curve a long time ago.
No. The counter proposition to you is that if we do nothing and we let it run through our population, we'll actually have so many people infected that our health system will be overrun and we won't be able to look after people and we'll have unnecessary deaths.
Look, I'm not saying let it run.
But you don't
That's
accept
a false
that.
dichotomy because there's not such a thing as a lockdown or not a lockdown. That's an argument that we got into last time. There's degrees of lockdown. And if you... It's try... The Oxford University... I sent you some data on this. They tried to quantify it, and they gave Sweden at the height of the pandemic a severity score of 40 out of 100. So 100 is the most severe lockdown that you can have. 0 score out of 100 is business as usual. Sweden went to 40 at the height of the lockdown, and the UK went to 75. So we've got to stop talking about lockdown or not lockdown. We've got to start talking about severity of lockdown. And I'm not suggesting that we just let it rip. I'm saying let's be practical and pragmatic about it, and let's use empirical data to come up with a strategy for dealing with this, a practical strategy for dealing with this, rather than being dictated to by the media and non-empirical evidence.
But others would say the empirical evidence is that the infection rates are such that you'll get so many people infected, so many people in hospital, that you'll end up not being able to look after these people and you'll have unnecessary deaths. But you don't accept that.
I don't think
data.
anyone's saying that now.
Yeah, no, they are.
I'm not
they're
saying
saying people are saying if we did nothing and we would recreate New York everywhere.
No.
But you don't think New York was a problem.
I haven't seen that. I've done a lot of reading on this, Trevor, and no one's saying that now.
Of course they are.
No one with any knowledge on this. This is like...
No.
I was thinking today, this is like nuclear power. So let me explain.
Hang on, no, wait. You can't deny that it's an infectious disease. And if we do nothing, people will be infected and we will end up with a massive amount of the population infected.
So what we're seeing now is lots of infections, but...
No, we're not. Where? In Australia, no.
In Australia.
No, we're not.
No, sorry, in the US.
Yes.
And Japan and countries like that.
I don't know about Japan, but let's just compare the US. Because the
I
US is a good
at the
example
data today. Japan's having what you would call a second wave if you said that they've got another rise in infections.
Let's just stick to the US.
In fact, they've got...
To not complicate things, can we just stick to the US?
Well, I'm just making the point that it's not the US that's having a second wave of infections. It's lots of countries around the world as they're opening back up. And what we're finding is that there's not a corresponding increase in the deaths. So what we're finding is that there's...
But why is there not a corresponding...
Because of innate immunity.
Because New York got overrun and we haven't got to an overrun situation yet. Like the hospitals in Florida, for example...
So we're going around in circles here. New York didn't get overrun.
Yeah, well, you're just not accepting that. So we are going around in circles. So, all right, we'll have to leave that.
Are we now moving on to masks?
Yes. I'm really... Scott, I'm glad you're back. Because I begin to... So, okay, Melbourne...
This is why I said that, Trevor... Paul's drunk too much of the libertarian Kool-Aid. You've drunk too much of the Chinese Communist Party Kool-Aid. So this is why I'm back to be the voice of reason.
Thanks. Masks. Victoria, they're now mandatory in public.
Absolutely. They bloody well should be too.
Does anybody disagree?
Yes.
Do tell us, MAGA, why?
MAGA?
That's funny, is it?
What's with the ad hominems? I just disagree.
It was funny. Look, he just did an ad hominem about me and the Chinese. And did I have a problem with that? So,
Well,
you know,
yes.
we're not offended around here, Paul.
No, we're not
we're not
offended.
easily offended.
I just think it's a poor characterisation for someone disagreeing to be then a Trumpite.
You are a Trumpite if you if you don't believe in compulsion on masks. Then you
So
are.
I must agree with Trump on everything.
No, you are not agreeing with Trump on everything. But
Whose side are you on, Paul? Come on, make a choice.
Actually, I'm open on the mask issue to some extent. Here's the thing.
Good for you.
So Craig, Deep Throat, sent us a link to a site where it goes through proper empirical studies by proper groups on various medical topics, and then tells you what the consensus is of the studies that have been done. Good. And when it came to masks, what it seemed to me was that masks are actually effective within a home to stop transmission between family members. So if, for example...
What about when you lift the mask up to have a little kiss?
Yeah,
and
then that doesn't work. Right. But if you, for example, had somebody staying in your home who was infected, then there's evidence that masks work with some effectiveness to stop transmission within a home. Mm-hmm. But it seems that in the outdoors, the usefulness of masks is questionable. Oh. It appears to be from the data. And so...
And beyond that, it doesn't appear as though this disease gets transferred outdoors full stop. Well, I shouldn't say that. Never say never, that you're never going to contract it outdoors, but the risk is so low, it's almost negligible. And masks are about managing risks. And if the risk isn't
But Paul,
is only low to mild in the first place, and
you're against masks.
I'm not against masks.
You're against mandatory masks.
Against mandatory masks.
Right.
Now, in the UK now that they've instituted mandatory masks when you enter a shop.
Right.
That would make more sense.
That makes sense.
It's like £100 fine.
Are you okay with that?
No.
Okay. See, from the evidence I've heard, I'd be okay with that because it's an indoor environment.
Okay.
And that, to me, would make sense.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can back it up with empirical evidence rather than anecdotal bullshit.
No,
I think Hong Kong has done something similar with...
Look, I'm open to persuasion. I'm just, by temperament, resistant to anything being mandatory.
Yes.
And I'm not a mugger.
I can understand where you're both coming from. No, not Paul. I can't understand you at all, I'm afraid. I can understand where you're coming from, Trevor, saying that, you probably shouldn't make it mandatory for outdoor use or anything like that. But if you're indoors, then I think it should be mandatory.
Indoor public space?
Yeah.
Definitely.
But see, then you've got the other problem where you get off the tram, you take your mask off, which is mean you're going to be touching it, and then you put it back on before you go into the shops. I would have thought that was where you could have ended up transferring the disease that could have been picked up on the tram on your hands, and you put it on your mask where you're taking it off when you get off the tram, then you put it back on, and you put the mask back on when you go back into the shops. I would have thought that you're better off just putting the mask on, wearing it until you get home again.
Wow.
The primary transfer mechanism is droplet transfer.
Yeah, I know, but then
not from surfaces.
So you guys...
Then why have they gone around and put up all those red stickers on the pedestrian crossings to say that you should put it on?
Because they're being very precautious.
Okay.
Because Deep Throat
and that was in the early stages of the pandemic when we knew little about it. And this is the problem. I had no problem with any of this stuff. In fact, when I first started getting my head into this COVID stuff, I thought people were underreacting because there were so many unknowns. And then strategies got put into place, and then new information come to light to show that it's not as bad as what we first thought. But then the authorities, rather than change the strategy to suit the new information, just tried to defend their initial strategy. And we got into this political situation where leaders were reluctant to say, you know what, we've got new information now. it's not as bad as we first thought, and so we're going to change our strategy. The media would have hammered them then and said they didn't know what they were talking about. They're flip-flopping. You know, they've changed their mind. Like flip-flopping is some
It's a
sin that
political
you can't
liability.
do,
Yeah, you
know?
don't want to do that in
So
politics.
if you come up with a strategy, you know, you
I totally agree. They just couldn't they couldn't admit publicly that they may have got the modelling wrong, that they may have instituted strategies that turned out not to be necessary. They just couldn't admit that they got anything wrong.
I don't think that's the case.
Really? When did they ever?
I don't think that
don't
they
think they had anything to-
overreacted.
no.
I think the evidence is that we've actually had a better result than we could have hoped for, and
I think
that as a result we're now considering elimination rather than suppression. So it's a better story than we could have hoped for. And I don't agree with you that they were too scared by the media to change their priorities or their tactics because the media would crucify them. I think they just, A, aren't that smart, B, can't tell a story, and C, don't know what they're doing anyway. But,
Well,
but
in
I
the
think if they
UK
actually looked at it and said, you know what, now's the time, we could go for this, they'd do it whether the media...
Well,
I don't agree that the
I
media's
go
to
back
blame
to
in a lack of
early
action.
March in the UK, because the UK got a bunch of scientists in a room, multidisciplinary, sociologists, data analysis. You know, they took a scientific approach to, okay, there's this COVID thing coming, what are we going to do? And they put a strategy in place. Immediately, the media jumped on it and criticised it because that's what the media's job is, and that's fair enough. But on the 16th of March, that report got released of that preliminary modelling data out of the Imperial College, and the media focused on two numbers there. There was a number of 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2 million deaths in the US. And that was the absolute worst case of all worst case scenarios. And days later, guess what? Boris Johnson and the UK changed strategy to exactly the strategy that the media was saying. It's the tail wagging the dog. We haven't got the scientists and the politicians in charge here. We've got the media in charge.
I don't think that was the case in Australia.
We followed suit. America went
we had
after
the
that,
benefit-
and we've pretty much followed America
We
in
had
terms of our stringency of our lockdown.
We haven't followed America.
We have.
No, we
We
haven't.
have, and I can show you the report from Oxford that showed that the stringency index of our lockdown mimicked the US almost to the day, Trevor.
No. Our
In
Australian...
terms of our lockdown, I've sent you this data and you've refused to look at it, obviously.
No, you told me you've sent me things before, you haven't sent me stuff. So Australia's lockdown and suppression has been totally different to the US.
How so?
Well, for a start.
for starters, we actually
In the
locked
US, you
down.
can't say a consistent story. You would have to say which state, for starters, because in the US...
but this report from Oxford averaged out all of the US states. It did a very thorough scientific analysis of the lockdown, Trevor.
look...
And I can show you the graphs. I could probably pull it up in 5 minutes if you give me the time.
I gave you examples of Ireland, I think, where there were arguments over the lockdown and its effectiveness between these different groups. But if your proposition is that Australia has followed the USA in terms of our response to coronavirus, I'll disagree, and we'll let that one ride. And
Well, you're not just disagreeing with me. You're disagreeing with the Oxford
send it to me.
intellectuals, Trevor. It's not my opinion. I'm just forwarding on information that's come to hand.
Send
and
it
it's
to
Oxford,
me.
so it's not some backwater. You know.
Send it to me, and I'll look at it. But
Again, I'll send it to you again.
yeah, well, send it to me in advance if you want to talk about it. And say,
I did. I sent it to you in advance of the last episode.
Let's say,
And Deep Throat had printouts of it,
right.
but we never got around to talking about it.
Okay, all right. Well, complain to me. But you want to talk about then? No, honestly, you sent me something about the lockdown in America matched the Australian lockdown, and you printed it out. Does this sound at all familiar to you?
No.
I've read it, but that's about
Deep Throat printed it out.
I read
was
it. I
pointing
don't-
there because Deep Throat was sitting there.
All right. Okay. Let's try and move on. But when it comes to masks, I'm prepared to say outdoors, I don't know that they're effective. Indoors, public spaces, good idea.
What I'd like to
But
just say
there's
about masks is why don't we have a consensus on whether they work or not? Like, I made this point in our chat today. We've got a Halon collider 1 kilometre underneath the earth in Sweden somewhere that costs $30 billion to build.
It's in Switzerland, isn't it?
Switzerland or CERN or wherever it is. And, yes, we've got a Higgs boson particle. Great. But the scientific community hasn't determined yet whether wearing masks in the middle of a pandemic is a good idea or not. There's no consensus on that.
Well, Warren,
And it just seems like,
what's an appropriate diet for a human being?
well...
There's no consensus on that either.
No, that's right.
So not everything has been worked out yet.
But all...
So you do your best based on the information you have.
And that's my point. There's lots of things that we should be studying that we're not.
Right. Well, I'm
And
sure
there's
people
stuff
are.
that we're studying, and I think, why are we studying that? Like,
Well, you
we've
need a
got
pandemic.
gender studies where we're looking at the difference between the 76 different genders, and we still don't know whether wearing a mask in the middle of a pandemic is a good idea or not. You've still got scientists going, well,
A lot of our
the jury's
pandemic,
out on that.
a lot of our pandemic knowledge will improve.
I'd like to think of it as seatbelts. Like, scientists got together at one point in time and said, yep, you should wear a seatbelt when you're travelling in a car. And we all thought, beaut, we'll do that. But wearing a mask in the middle of a pandemic, not so sure. You could put it on wrong. Well, you could put a seatbelt on wrong as well and do yourself more harm than good,
Unlikely with a modern seatbelt.
Well, you could sit in it wrong. You could. I've seen some.
You'd have to be trying to get it wrong.
Yeah, and people do some stupid things with masks as well. I mean, we talked about it last week about people pulling it down and leaving their nose hanging out over the top. But even I'd think my intuition tells me that even a poorly worn mask is better than no mask at all. I mean, they're telling you to sneeze into your elbow. Surely it's better to sneeze into the backside of a mask than your elbow.
Yeah, well, your intuition tells you that, but according to Craig, you could be worse if you've got an infected mask.
Could be worse, yeah.
So
but you could be in a badder situation by incorrectly fitting a seatbelt as well.
It's.
I mean, if you put a child who's too young into a seatbelt, I could imagine a situation where an incorrectly fitted seatbelt or wearing it.
So what's the point here? Is it that
I'm saying
you're just disappointed that the medical community
I
hasn't
am
worked out
disappointed
masks?
the medical community for all of our scientific prowess and all of the achievements.
And did you
that
find
we've
any
made.
articles about masks, about its effectiveness?
No.
Didn't find one about it. No, you didn't find a single study.
I haven't gone looking.
Oh, well, there might be one then.
But
There might be one.
what
Craig did say
they're
that-
saying here in Queensland, you don't have to wear a mask. They said in the United States during the early stage of the pandemics, please don't wear a mask. Now they're saying do wear a mask.
Yeah.
Craig says don't wear a mask. Other doctors would say you should wear a mask.
No,
I'm
Craig
saying
didn't
let's-
say don't wear a mask.
But he said they have their limitations.
He said there are issues with it, but he didn't say don't wear a mask. Anyway, I'll send you a link to the study on masks for next week.
Okay, good.
So, which was basically saying
So-
outdoors limited effectiveness, indoors
But
definitely.
what do you think if masks were made mandatory to enter a store, an office, or a workplace?
A good idea
I don't have a problem with it.
in the current
No
environment.
problem whatsoever.
But I mean, it could go on forever if
Yeah,
if the idea is elimination.
Well, let's do it
It's
for
only
6
gonna-
to 12 months and see what happens.
Exactly. And I only think it's going to be down the eastern seaboard because we're the 3 states that have, Queensland is possibly going to have some community transmission because we've opened our border up to New South Wales. We could end up with community transmission with that opening.
Have we let those dirty southerners?
We
back
have
into
let them
the
back
state?
into the state, yes. Now,
Can't we just keep them out?
we're going to I think we're going to end up with some community transmission up here north of the Tweed. But I don't think it's going to be extreme. It's not going to be another Victoria. We'd hope it's not going to be another Victoria. And
Time will tell.
yeah, only time will tell. Now, it seems to me that the Western states, and I include South Australia, Western Australia, and the Northern Territory have eliminated all community transmission.
Well, they're lucky because no one wants to go to South Australia.
And
Sorry to the listeners in those states.
Just joking.
And
It's just it was like the Chinese thing. It was like the MAGA thing.
I
It's
know.
just a joke.
Of course. We all know that.
Yeah.
And Tasmania has also eliminated community transmissions too. So, you know, I think you could then possibly carve off the eastern seaboard and say everyone in the eastern seaboard has got to wear a mask. You know?
Right. Can I just... there's messages I've been missing. Sorry, I didn't scroll down to the bottom. Some good news about mask wearing in the UK for young people. Apparently, it's all the rage on... What young people are doing is they've got their mask on and then they'll put a sort of a scarf over their head and put a bit of grey hair and they can walk into liquor stores and buy alcohol.
Yes, I saw that. That was funny, wasn't it?
So teenagers able to buy alcohol because the mask is covering their young faces and they're loading up. Right. Here's another one then. You're the proprietor in Melbourne, kind of in a hot spottish area, of a pizza shop. And a phone call comes in and says, we'd like 9 pizzas, please, to take away. Do you provide the takeaway 9 pizzas and wish them luck? Or do you
do.
Or do you consider contacting the authorities and saying, look, you know what, I've just got this order for 9 pizzas. It might be all good, but I don't know. I'm a little bit worried that there's a gathering of more than 5 people. Here's what's happening. Libertarian? Tell me.
We want to
let me
create
guess- let me guess.
East Germany
Libertarian
in Australia
Paul.
now.
Libertarian Paul.
We want to create East Germany in Australia, do we? Where everyone's told to snitch on their whoever who might be
China.
breaking a rule.
China. We want to create
Paul,
China.
can I give you
in
an example?
Australia.
You're in a car as a passenger.
Yep.
And you're driving down the freeway. And
I'm driving.
I know you're the passenger, and your
I got
driver is
one
driving.
of those seats like the baby in The Simpsons.
So you can access your mobile phone legitimately. And you're in the middle lane, and on the outside lane, a motorbike tears past doing obviously 160k, and you can see the number plate.
Yep.
Do you hop on the phone to ring the police and say there's a motorbike out of control on the...
Out of control. You said he was just past you doing 160. That's not necessarily out of control.
There's a motorcyclist doing 160 on the freeway. Would you consider it?
As an ex-motorcyclist, no, of course not. He was having fun, or she was having fun.
Till he wrapped himself around a pole, or wrapped somebody else around a pole.
That's his or her choice.
So
you
you just let that one go.
know? I would let it go.
Okay, all right. Let me see if I've got another example. Any thoughts on the pizza proprietor? If the 9 pizzas have been ordered?
Oh, God. I don't know.
See,
If they were young people, healthy people, go for it.
If they were...
Have a party, guys.
What about if they were
if it's been delivered to a
professional
nursing
rugby
home?
league players?
Delivering to a nursing home, different story.
Report them.
Different story. It's about risk. It's about risk. Likelihood and consequences.
But in a nursing home, they'd surely have more than 20-odd old people to eat those 9 pizzas, wouldn't they? They probably just...
That's a good point.
They probably just can't be bothered cooking them a decent meal that night.
Yeah, reported them for providing poor nutrition.
If you
but,
were...
if you're looking at 9 pizzas amongst 5 people, that's quite possible to do. Because I remember the night, the night that the night after I went to the
can eat
doctor
a
for my life-changing
piece.
appointment, I went home and I scarped down 2 large pizzas and washed it down with a 2-litre
2 large
Yes,
pizzas?
and I washed it down with a 2-litre bottle of Coke and got up the next morning and cooked breakfast and cut
2
lunch and all
large
that sort of
pizzas?
thing. I did that, yes.
Was that like a last hurrah?
That was a last hurrah.
Hollow legs.
Didn't you hear that story?
No.
Oh, the doctor took his glasses off and looked at me. I went in on my 45th birthday, took his glasses off, looked at me, and he said, "Do you want to see 50?"
Really?
And I said, "No, 40th birthday, actually." Yeah, he took his glasses off, looked at me, and said, "Do you want to see 50?" And I said, "Is it that bad? Is it?" He said, "Yes, it is." So I went home.
Imagine if he said there's a pandemic coming. And if you're obese, you're at a high risk
Is there a circumstance where you would report someone to the police? Of
Yes.
Illegal activity?
Yes.
Right.
Like what?
Suspected child abuse, I suppose. If I was damn sure someone was, bashing his wife in the house next door, yeah, I would definitely call the police, absolutely.
Right.
Where I saw, definite harm being perpetrated or very likely to be perpetrated. But 9 pizzas doesn't ring alarm bells to me in that same sort of sense.
Okay, but bearing in mind, of course, the police turn up and it's 5 guys scoffing 9 pizzas and they say, good luck to you guys, see ya. Like, if they're not actually doing anything wrong, there's not a problem, is it?
I just don't want a society where everybody who has the sort of vaguest, slightest, feeling that something might be wrong or somebody might be breaking the law, that they call the freaking cops on you. I mean, who wants to live in a society like that? Do you?
Do we really want to be in a society where young people don't care about old people, though? Like,
Because they're eating pizza?
no, because they're gathering a crowd of 20 people who don't give a shit that they're,
And they're
possibly
probably all-
spreading a virus that's going to kill.
And they're probably all
My mother.
under 30 and
Yeah.
very unlikely to...
But it's not the point of whether they're going to be die of coronavirus. It's the fact that they spread it to somebody else.
They're going
It's
to
the-
take it home.
It's the uncaringness of it.
They're going to take it home. They're going to give it to mum and dad. Mum and dad are going to go see their mum and dad in the old folks' home, and then that's where it spreads.
That's a big series of assumptions, I think. I just don't think you can second guess every possible, sort of line of infection that might result from a few young people having a pizza party, for goodness sake.
I'll just quote Julia in the chat room. She says, young people get infected and can infect others. The risk is not limited to them. Their decision to take a risk affects others in a pandemic. Rights and responsibilities are 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Inseparable. Hierarchy of rights. When your assertion of your rights negatively affects someone else, or could, you've gone too far. Like, just getting back to the motorcyclist, you were like, he's having fun. But
On
he
a
could kill
motorway,
someone.
right?
Yeah, but still, that's dangerous to the rest of us.
Depends on how much traffic's on the motorway, really. Well, it does.
A motorcyclist doing 150 is not dangerous.
Well,
Like-
when I drive to Sydney to visit family, I usually drive through the night because there's just far less traffic and it's safer for me as a driver with less traffic on the road. It's the same for a motorcyclist.
I would say it's a different story if the authorities, the governments have said, look, we're going to try and eliminate this thing. But they haven't actually said that, have they? No one, I don't think anyone's come out in Australia and said, our goal is for elimination now.
no
Scott Morrison hasn't said it.
No one has said it because they're sticking with this fiction that suppression is the right way to go.
Yeah.
Now,
And they've created this fluffy goal of suppression.
Because you don't
What's-
like the goal,
what's-
you don't like the law.
No, I'm saying,
So you're not going to
what's
help with the
suppression?
law.
Define it. Put some numbers on it. What?
But you seem to be
How
saying
do we know that we've suppressed it? Because I engaged a woman last week online about COVID-19, and she said, here in Queensland, we've got to keep the borders closed because we've got to get on top of this thing. And I said, we've got 2 confirmed cases. What's your definition of getting on top of this? Like,
perhaps if she'd said stay on top, would that have been okay?
no, I just...
If she'd
I
said
haven't got
stay
a
on
problem
top,
with her
would have-
saying it. I'm just saying put some numbers on it.
But if she'd
Define
said,
it.
If she said,
What's getting on top of it?
if
What's
that
suppressing?
same woman had said stayed, would you have been okay with the statement? Maybe she's just not good at English. Maybe she meant to say stay.
I'm okay with her saying it.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
just
see.
asking for definition around what is get on top of it or what is suppress it, because it's a word. Like, you can say something is dangerous. What's dangerous to me is not dangerous to you. What's risky to me is not risky to someone else.
Yeah, but the point
Getting
of
on
this,
top of it, I would have thought getting it down to 2 cases would have been getting on top of it. But obviously for her, that wasn't getting on top of it. And I would like to see some politicians have the balls to come out and say, rightio, we've suppressed it. Now we're going to eliminate it. But they haven't got the balls to say that
I think you'll
because
find they will.
they don't believe that they can actually achieve that. And when they don't achieve that, they'll get crucified.
I think you'll find that it's at some point somebody's going to say it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's going to be very interesting if Daniel Andrews says it, won't it?
And yeah.
Yep.
God, he's got some work to do then.
Let's quickly
That's
move
pretty
on.
hell
One
of a lot to do.
more COVID thing before we move on to before we move on to other non-COVID things.
Danii Minogue.
Danii Minogue.
Hey,
We're not talking about celebrities, are we?
Danii Minogue.
Yeah.
She came into the country and she got a special leave pass. She didn't have to go into quarantine.
What?
From her doctor.
That's outrageous.
It is
She had a letter
outrageous.
from her doctor.
Well, she should have been fucking locked up like everyone who
No,
comes
hang
into
on.
the
Oh,
country.
good. I'm the only one who's saying it's okay. So
It's okay that she got in
So-
with special dispensation.
here's well. Should we just give some
I
facts?
don't know the facts. At all.
Okay,
Yeah,
let
give
me
us
give
the facts,
Let's
yeah.
give some facts. Okay. The Health Minister in Queensland denies that celebrity Danii Minogue received special treatment after it was revealed the presenter was allowed to bypass costly hotel quarantine and self-isolate at a private residence instead.
Her and her son.
Dr. Young, so she's come from the Gold Coast with her son. Dr. Young said because Ms. Minogue had a COVID-safe plan managed by a third party, because she was managing all of the costs of her quarantine, she was allowed to stay in private accommodation, right? Health Minister said people in the film and television industry, as well as a number of other groups, including consular officials, ADF personnel, oil and gas industry workers, have also been allowed to avoid mandatory hotel quarantine. I believe I've given 38 such exemptions. So here's what I think is happening. I think she is in a private residence and she has had to pay for private security guards to be there watching and making sure that she doesn't leave. I think that's what
What
is
leads you
happening.
to think she would pay private security?
Ms. Minogue had a COVID-safe plan managed by a third party. So,
Her boyfriend?
and because she's managing all the costs of the quarantine. So, to me, let's just assume, forget what the actual situation is, but let's just assume that she's agreed to pay private security to watch her and tick off that she stays and does all the right things in the same way as they do at hotel rooms. If somebody can afford to do that and wants to, that to me sounds okay. Because I don't care whether they're in a hotel room or not. If somebody is independently watching them and testifying as to the fact that they're isolated, nobody's coming in and out, what would it matter?
No, I think she should have been locked in a hotel
Well-
like everyone else.
I think it's great promotion for whatever TV show or album she's got coming up. You know,
And-
these stories are all about promoting celebrities.
Yeah, and you know how trustworthy celebrities are. When
Don't think she just wanted to be in her own home or in a
of
private.
course she did. Who wouldn't?
Yeah. But you think it's because of publicity. And she thought, I'll do this because it'll get more publicity.
Well, Kanye has got a new album out, and he decided to run for president, didn't he? And that drew a lot of attention to
Okay.
Kanye.
Just back to Minogue. So you say she should have gone into a hotel with everyone else.
Exactly. If she wanted to upgrade it to a suite or something like that at her own expense, that would be fine.
Okay.
Don't care. I haven't got the details to be able to.
Didn't even want to work with my assumed details.
Well, there was a letter from her doctor, and they weren't saying what was in that letter
Yeah.
from her doctor. So until we know what was in that letter from her doctor, we're only speculating.
As an egalitarian, I think if they're going to
An
make
egalitarian.
rules
Yes.
for citizens, then they should apply equally to all citizens.
Right. Okay.
If you are listening, Danii Minogue, I've got a spare room at my
Right.
place.
There you go, Danny.
I'll look after you.
There she goes. And her
Do you
son.
like bicycles,
So,
Danny?
right. Was Hillsong update. How's your conversion going?
Well, I still haven't got Jesus in my heart yet.
What? Not yet.
Um,
You've had a
and-
whole week.
You've got him
Yeah.
on your side, though, don't you?
Is it on my side? Is it? I thought it was in my heart. I
No,
can't
there was
remember.
that photo that I sent of that
Well, the
Jesus
heart
is on
is-
your side.
The heart is on the left side, so in that sense, Jesus is on your side.
So last we spoke, you were invited to start the Alpha course.
Yeah, and I just sent an inquiry in to see what this Alpha course was all about, and not surprisingly, it's not a course. It's just a
Right.
group chat. It's just
Right.
getting people together to facilitate discussion about Christianity.
conversate.
and to conversate. Did you notice I used that word?
I
in the
did.
email?
Yeah, I did notice that.
I thought you'd be all over that.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
So yeah, I'm disappointed that I can't report back much from Hillsong at the moment, and I'll keep an eye on their website and work out when they're going to be open for a service, and I'll get along to that, and I'll try and make a few friends and
Right.
get some juicy information for you. But at the moment, all I can report back is that swapped a few emails. There were some sort of auto-generated ones, but to be honest, there hasn't been a terrible. They haven't been that pushy. They haven't been as pushy as I thought they were going to be. And you know, I've subscribed to different things online, and they've been way pushier. They've sent emails every second or third day saying, "Have you signed up yet? Have you,
Yep.
click here and send money."
I think
Blah blah blah. They haven't done that. So
they're playing the long game, Warren.
Right.
yeah,
Yep.
don't know, but
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I saw that they sent you, one of the emails they sent gave the example of a man in Canada who was drowning, and a Good Samaritan jumped in to try and save him.
Yeah,
and
I
the Good
saw that.
Samaritan died in the original sort of drowning guy was rescued by other people,
Yeah.
and the person who jumped in as a Good Samaritan trying to rescue this drowning guy died.
yeah,
And basically in the email, it said, rescue officials said it serves as a tragic reminder of what can happen when people who aren't trained in life-saving skills jump into the water when they see someone in distress. Many would-be rescuers enter the water only to become victim themselves. And I think the whole point of that was to plant the seed that you need experienced people with you to
Yes.
save you.
Oh,
So
right.
it said
Yeah.
a drowning man cannot save another drowning man. And
okay,
we too find ourselves drowning in our sin,
Yes.
unable to save ourselves.
Yes,
And we're all
that's right.
sinners after
And it was
all.
really like you need an expert to jump in and
You
save
need an
you.
expert on sinning.
Yes.
Is what you need.
Yeah.
To
I'd like
point
to know
out
the
to you-
definition of sin, because I don't think I sin.
It's doing something bad that God doesn't like.
Yeah.
Masturbation.
Right.
God definitely
I'd do
doesn't
that.
like that.
I don't know. I don't know. Some of this COVID stuff, getting close to it, but we'll get back to that another time. Now,
There you go. I tried to work penises into the episode.
you did. We'll talk about penises in this topic right now.
Oh, excellent.
Martina
Scott's excited.
Navratilova.
She doesn't have a penis.
No, but it came up in. It's part of it. Did you read the article I sent you the link to?
I didn't see the one.
I
on
didn't see that
Martina Navratilova.
I just sent you the link. I didn't have the actual
Okay.
Oh,
cancel culture
Mm-hmm.
that we spoke about last week.
Indeed.
Right? And here is a really interesting story about Martina Navratilova, famous tennis player. Right?
Very.
What do you think of when you think of Martina Navratilova?
Amazing athlete.
She's a lesbian, isn't she?
She is.
Yes, lesbian and very physical
mm.
And very rich.
and really played a different style of game to the other women. Like she was the first to really muscle up and get quite
She was
almost
the first
manly
Sabrina
in her
Williams.
in her physique. So she was playing Chris Evert in their sort of iconic matches, and Chris Evert Lloyd was
Yeah.
more of a graceful, feminine,
backhand.
big American girl. But so Navratilova sort of broke a few barriers in that she was openly gay,
Yes.
openly worked on the gym and muscles, and she hired a as her coach a trans person. So
did she?
yes, Dr. Renee Richards, a former Navy pilot, eye surgeon, and captain of the Yale tennis team, who in the 1970s successfully sued the Women's Tennis Association for the right to compete in professional women's tournaments. So she's gay. She's has a partner, Judy Nelson, and her coach is a trans. One of the first sort of openly trans people.
Trans woman.
Yeah, trans.
That would
Yes.
have been huge in the 80s.
Exactly.
Huge.
And she was a real outspoken sort of activist for all of those groups.
She doesn't like our Margaret Court, does she?
Well, let me get on to this.
Oh, right.
So
She's not the only one that doesn't like Margaret Court.
So there's a guy called Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept.
Yes.
Now, Glenn Greenwald is as left-wing as you can get.
Absolutely.
We can agree on that.
Yes.
He was a big fan of Martina Navratilova and wanted to make a movie documentary about her. And he's a gay man, and for all the things that she stood for, and he was a tennis fan, blah, blah, wanted to tell her story, not only just the sporting side, but her activism side, etc., etc. So he's determined he's going to do a documentary, and he's looking for a director to be the director of the documentary. And he comes across a director called Kimberly Peirce, who had directed the extraordinary and groundbreaking film Boys Don't Cry. So this was the true story of Brandon Teena, a trans boy who was raped and murdered in Nebraska in 1993, just weeks after turning 21. And so this director had fought for 3 years to get the film made. It was a big success. It earned an Academy Award nomination for the then unknown Chloe Sevigny as Best Supporting Actress. And at the time, the relatively obscure Hilary Swank was chosen over Meryl Streep as to play Tina, and she won the Best Actress Award. So to play the role, this director required Hilary Swank to live as a man for months prior to the filming. Like, really, take this seriously. You're going to be a trans person.
Method acting, right?
Yeah, whatever. Okay. Huge sort of success. And the director of that film, this Peirce, was invited to go to a university, Reed College in Oregon, and she was then to give a speech after showing the film. But as she began to speak, student protesters rushed the stage and began hurling insults at the director. Signs had been posted aimed at this director that read, "Fuck your transphobia, you don't fucking get it, and fuck this cis white bitch." And for more than 2 hours, screaming students refused to let this director speak about this trans positive film. And the reason was because she hadn't cast a trans person to play the part of Tina.
Surprised,
That
not surprised, right?
was the reason for cancelling that director.
Isn't that absurd?
This is helping Trump, all of this rubbish.
Yes. So this director Peirce tried explaining, though she wanted to cast a trans male actor and interviewed many, she couldn't find one who could carry the film the way Swank was able to. And blah, blah, blah. And the fact that she required Swank to live as a male for months before shooting, and that eventually Swank won Academy Award,
Says
won an
that,
Oscar,
yeah,
says it was a good
the director's
choice.
judgment was correct.
So anyway, that director wasn't prepared to do the Navratilova movie documentary for that and for other reasons, which he goes on to in this piece. So Greenwald's still determined to make the movie, but he's had this discussion with his Peirce about this earlier trans one, and going, oh shit. So still determined to make the movie, but then in 2018, December, everything changed. Navratilova had seen photos posted on Twitter of a trans woman who, without undergoing sex reassignment surgery, was competing as a professional athlete in women's sports, specifically cycling. The trans woman was not only competing but beginning to win, sometimes in a dominant fashion, even though in her mid-30s she was already past the normal prime for cycling competition. Cycling expert was...
She went on to become world champion.
Okay. Navratilova observed that she was vanquishing professional female athletes who were cis women and who had lived their entire lives and had gone through puberty as women. So Navratilova, after seeing the photo, was wondering aloud on Twitter whether trans women who have not had sex reassignment surgery and who have lived most of their lives as men should be able to compete in female sports.
How dare she?
She's sort of pondering aloud. Well, the internet just came crashing down on Navratilova.
On Navratilova, did
yes.
it? Yes.
And the denunciations, I've already explained, Navratilova, openly gay,
The
living with a woman,
Twitterati have no
and
mercy.
had a trans coach in the 70s when these things were unheard of. The denunciations on Navratilova as an anti-trans bigot were instantaneous, swift and brutal, and they took zero account of her lifetime pioneering devotion to all of these issues. And so
The left continues to eat itself, and Trump sits back and just
So-
big smile on his face, rubbing his hands together.
So Navratilova then went into full-blown repentance mode.
Did she?
Oh, did she?
By the
Oh.
way, this article is by Glenn Greenwald, and Glenn Greenwald is as left-wing as you can get. So he's unhappy about this treatment. So when you say the left,
Unhappy about the
treatment of Navratilova.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he's agreeing that
by
this
the
is
cancel
crazy,
culture.
this cancel culture. Okay. So Navratilova went into full-blown repentance mode. You know, mea culpa.
Really?
I promise.
You
Look,
never do that.
She said, look, I won't speak on this issue for 2 months. I'm going to go away and I'm going to research and learn more, and I'm just going to say nothing for 2 months. So she did that, as promised.
And?
Well, she
no,
then
that's
broke...
not a mea culpa.
Well, not mea culpa, but,
I'm going to go away and have a think about this.
no, okay, let me...
I might come back and apologise, but I might come back and tell you what he gets stuffed as
After deleting the offending tweets and apologising, Navratilova continued to be branded as an anti-trans bigot. She was told she had harmed trans people. So she did apologise. So she didn't speak for 2 months. But then after 2 months, in an op-ed in the London Times, she published a column recounting that she'd promised to stay quiet. And she said, well, I've now done that, and if anything, my views have strengthened. And not only did she reaffirm her view that it was unfair for trans women to compete against cis women in professional sports, she went further, claiming it was a form of cheating, particularly when sex reassignment surgery was not required, but instead merely a regimen of hormone treatments, which could be reversed at any time. So she's just saying it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And she went on. So what happened here seems clear. Navratilova, by asking an earnest question, one which is on the minds of many people as they watch these profound social changes, but are uninformed about the science and the specific claims invoked to justify these changes. Once she was excoriated, without any nursing or understanding, it drove her further into a feeling of alienation from her accusers. So the documentary's not going to happen for now. But what an extraordinary story. Like, seriously, Martina Navratilova, a great advocate for gay.
It's one of a number of those sorts of stories. Crazy stories of cancel culture.
There are quite a lot of stories in the media at the moment, or at least the media that I read, about trans activism and the cancel culture that seems to accompany it. And there's a bunch of people, including, of course, we know, what's her name?
J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, who've come out and said, look, sorry, but, you know, if you're born a female, regardless of what you do to yourself the rest of your life, or if you're born a male, that's basically what you are. And I mean, not that you have to stay that way and live that way for the rest of your life, but in terms of biological essentialism, and let's face it, in sport, we separate male and female sports for a very good reason, because males are inherently stronger and have not only greater physical strength, greater stamina and staying power than females, okay? So we know males are born with an athletic advantage. You allow men to compete as women, of course they're going to beat the women, you know? And it's been shown that they invariably do if they've got any sort of athletic prowess to start with.
Well, what Martina was actually saying there was that there were people that hadn't undergone any sort of surgery. or
Yes, but
anything
the
like
surgery doesn't change
I know that.
that
I understand
biological
that.
advantage.
Exactly, and like Trevor's saying, yeah, you can turn on and off hormone treatments.
Yep. And you've just got that body mass and strength.
Exactly.
So her trans coach, who had competed as a tennis player, Dr. Renee Richards, she came out also and said it's unfair because when she did it, she transitioned before puberty. So she had done a much more serious transition, and so hadn't had the benefit of a obviously male physique. So she, even this woman who was a trans athlete herself and had competed, said it's not fair that these trans athletes are competing when they're doing it post puberty.
I read an article some months ago by an American woman who specialised in these things, and she was involved in, I think, college sports, college level sports, and perhaps got to observe high school, like elite high school level sports. And she said that at the moment in the United States, it's becoming increasingly common for teenage boys to transition, and then if they're athletic, they just dominate.
Yes.
They absolutely dominate, and the girls just cannot beat them.
Yeah, I've seen video clips of that sort of thing.
It's going to be interesting to see where that all finishes up, because it's a very complicated issue and not a lot is understood about it, and it's very complicated and complex and icky, and it's just going to take a while to sort that one out. But
Let's get our medical professionals working on mask theories before.
I reckon that's a priority.
Athletic
That's
theories.
probably a bigger
Yes.
priority.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't offend anyone by saying that,
There we
but
go. Right, still
I'm
on-
worried about the next pandemic. We've got to get this mask thing sorted out before the next pandemic, because that's the one we've got to worry about.
A serious one, yeah. Cancel culture and beans. So, yes, in the United States, for years, the Goya brand was synonymous with Latino American dream. The sheer number of products that line the grocery store aisles, from refried pinto beans to sazon and azafran seasoning. Basically, a really, really popular Latino food brand in America. And the boss of the organisation met with Trump in the Rose Garden and was recorded as saying, "We're all truly blessed at the same time to have a leader like President Trump, who is a builder," Mr. Unanu said. And that's what my grandfather did. So the leader, the head of the Goya brand praised Trump, and immediately people decided to boycott the Goya brand, which had been a family favourite for generations. And so, Scott, you would claim this is a boycott rather than a
It's a
cancel
boycott.
culture.
Yeah, it's a
Yep.
boycott.
And thoughts, gentlemen?
I've got something to add on boycotts, and I do agree with Scott, it's a boycott.
Before you do, I also saw a picture of Trump's daughter holding a can of beans or talking about the beans, and people were saying, well, this is an abuse of office, because people in the government are not supposed to be in any way associated with promoting branded goods.
Yeah, he's since been photographed with beans on the Resolute desk, it's called, I think. The Oval Office desk is called the Resolute desk or something.
Whose desk?
The President's desk in the Oval Office, is it
The
called?
desks have names, do they?
I don't know.
Somebody Google and tell me if the desk in the Oval Office is called the Resolute or something like that.
But Trump's shameless, isn't he? Totally shameless.
He's supposed to step away from all of his businesses as well as soon
He
as he
didn't,
took
though,
office,
did
and he
he?
didn't. So I think in terms of misdemeanors,
It's a small one.
you know, if he's holding up a can of beans, that's nothing in comparison to him still being the director of his empire.
And installing his family in
Yeah.
high-paid government positions.
So we're all okay with people deciding, oh, I'm not going to buy those beans. The stupid company likes.
Their choice.
Okay.
What I have a problem with is secondary boycotts. And from my understanding, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but secondary boycotts are actually illegal. So that's a situation where I own a big business and Paul owns a business and he sells products to you, Trevor. And I say to you, Trevor, as a customer of me, stop buying Paul's products because I don't like Paul.
Right.
You're not actually, that is illegal.
Right.
So for a case where you've got people who watch, say, the Alan Jones show and they see that he has sponsors, they have every right to say, well, I'm not going to use let's say he's sponsored
Yeah.
by Young Henry's craft beer. I'm not going to drink Young Henry's craft beer anymore. But if I put pressure on Young Henry's to stop sponsoring, or I put pressure on other people or other organisations to boycott Young Henry's, that's actually illegal.
But Get Up did that.
Yeah, they do it, and it's illegal.
I don't know the law on secondary boycotts.
And
but
I don't know it in detail either, but
Yeah.
that's what I've heard. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because you wouldn't want a situation where I, as a massive company, could put Paul out of business just because I didn't like him by going through you.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to look up secondary boycotts. That I would have thought if Get Up had done something illegal, that there's enough people who hate Get Up that they would have been charged. So they wouldn't have got away with, like Alan Jones would have said to one of his mates, illegal activity that's hurting me, do something about it.
Well,
So,
there's enough people that hate Trump, and he's still
yeah, but
got the reins of all of his businesses, and he's the president of the United States. So I would have thought there'd be enough people to put pressure on Trump to.
Yeah, but
That now didn't happen either, did
But
it?
my point is that Get Up isn't Trump. So Get Up would be subject to a powerful figure like if they were doing something wrong or illegal. So I don't think it could have been illegal because otherwise they would have been charged. There's no way they would have got away with it with enough people hating Get Up. It's particularly the Liberal Party, let's face it, who hate Get Up. There's no way that they wouldn't have been charged. So let's...
Well, Get Up are a they're not an Australian organisation, are they?
Well,
I think they're
I don't know where they're
they're
registered.
based in
but
the
they act-
US,
But it would be an independent operation in Australia.
but I think they're registered in the US,
It doesn't matter.
and
if-
their impact on the last election, particularly in Manly, could have been considered as international interference in much the same way as the Russians interfered or supposedly interfered in the US election.
But you can't say that if you don't know where they're registered and where they're from. Like, you can't say that. You shouldn't say that.
Oh, do I have to do a retraction there? Get Up.
Well, you can't say that they're guilty of foreign interference if you don't. If you
I'll look it
don't
up.
know.
I'll look it up. That's
Like, you're
that's
just
what I heard.
Totally guessing.
No, I'm not totally guessing.
Right.
I
I wouldn't accuse them of illegal foreign interference in an election without being sure.
No, but the whole point is there is no shareholding or anything like that with Get Up. It's just a NGO that might have been set up with seed capital from the US, but most of their money comes from private
Local
donors here in
donations.
Australia.
private donors here in Australia.
Yeah. And I would have thought that they would operate independently in Australia on Australian issues, wouldn't you think?
My recollection of it is that they were set up by the union
Look,
movement. weren't
without us knowing, it's useless talking about it unless we've actually examined it.
I love
So-
speculating them.
Well, I hate speculating on something like that if you've got absolutely no idea. So we can't. We're just guessing about something we could be completely wrong about. But just getting back to the beans guide before we leave that one. So people boycotted the beans unexpectedly.
A lot of people?
Yeah. Yeah. But on the other hand, lots of people now buying the beans
That's what I would have thought.
who didn't before, because now buying beans is a political action. So,
like not wearing a mask.
it's reached the point where buying beans is a political statement. If, for example, the bean sales for that company plummeted and weren't made up for by the MAGA groups
customers,
now buying beans, and the company suffered a significant downfall, would the company be able to say to the CEO, you know what, that was a really, really stupid thing to do, reasonably foreseeable that you could have ruined our business, you're no longer CEO.
And sacked him.
Yeah, how would you be with that?
How would I be?
Would you say that was an action open to a board to sack the CEO because
They always can, can't they?
I'm just making sure. Like, I don't know where you stand on these things half the time, Paul. Like, it would not have surprised me if
company
you'd have
board-
said, how dare they? The man's got free speech. He should be able to say what he likes. So I just...
It's not about free speech.
Okay,
In
good.
that case, is it?
No, that's...
I didn't, even think of free speech when
Okay.
you were talking about it.
Right. Because
Do you
he
know we
made
were
a
talking
political
about-
statement that's going to cost him his job.
Well, last week, slightly off topic, but
Before you tell me last week, you're just okay with that?
yeah, I'm okay. I mean, what goes on inside a company board
Okay.
is between them and them, isn't it?
I'll just file that away for future reference.
Okay.
Because,
Because?
well, an editor gets fired for mucking up, but a CEO...
That's what I was just about to get to.
Right, okay.
And I was reading an article today about the New York Times and the way it was the opinions editor who resigned, wasn't fired, resigned in disgust, right, at the way she was treated. I read an article today who by someone who was saying the reason the New York Times, which used to be evidently considered to be the bearer of the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth in terms of the US media, used to have a much wider readership, but with the downturn of print media and the necessity of turning to subscriptions and paywalls, their readership base has narrowed a whole lot, and that's why that they've become so careful not to offend their readership, is because they know who their readership is now, because they're all subscriptions, and they, I guess, rightly or wrongly, have guessed that their readership are people who tend to be on the left of the political spectrum, and that's why. So it was not a random event at all.
Just harking back to the earlier topic, somebody in the chat room, Peter, who I can assure you is eminently qualified on this particular issue, says secondary boycott laws only apply to unions. So
Oh, do they?
there you go.
Okay.
So Get Up, not a union to the best of my knowledge. So, right. Thank you, Peter, in the chat room. Right. That was that and that. How are we going here? Did you see, well, you would have seen for sure, the Black Lives Matter put in yellow paint outside
it's brilliant.
Trump Tower?
Didn't see.
And the black woman putting black paint on it.
Yeah. Okay, but before we get to that, you've seen the Black Lives Matter written on the road. Okay, right
outside
outside
of-
Trump Tower,
No, I
New York
haven't seen it.
City mayor or whoever, somebody in power has authorised the writing in big yellow writing on the street, Black Lives Matter outside Trump Tower, and then there's a clip of
Video.
this.
You've
a
got to
video.
watch it, listener. It's
There'll be a link to it where there's two ladies, but one in particular, black ladies,
Yeah.
have these paints, tins of black paint, and start spreading it over the Black Lives Matter
Yellow
road,
paint.
yeah, yellow paint, and then she gets down on her hands and knees and is just spreading it all over and saying, basically saying,
Black
they
Lives
don't-
Matter don't care about black lives.
they don't care about black lives. Jesus matters. They don't care about us. They don't care about black lives.
And
And she's smearing this stuff all over and ruining the Black Lives Matter. Yeah.
And she was a black woman.
And the
Yes.
police that are there are just so confused. It's like, what do I do?
Yes. They're being very gentle with her.
Yeah.
But she's down on all fours, hands and knees, spreading this paint out.
Yeah.
And it's obviously incredibly slippery because one of the policemen is
Cops
trying to
falls
grab
over.
her, and it's like out of Keystone Cops or something.
And
Cops
she's also
sliding around
yelling
and
out,
slipping all over.
Ban the police, ban the police. That's bullshit.
Yeah. And what she is saying is refund the police. So you've heard this.
Oh, not
you've heard of-
defund.
You've
Hers
heard of
is refund.
defund the
Yes,
police.
yes.
So she's going, well, the opposite of
Yes,
defund the police
refund
is
them.
refund the police instead of just fund the police, perhaps. Would have
She
been
was
better.
one of these people you refer to as a contrarian, I think,
I
wasn't
think,
she?
I think she was. But anyway, one of the really interesting moments in it is the police are being very gentle with her.
Yeah.
And there's some black guys around telling her to fuck off.
Yeah.
And one guy is yelling at the police, why aren't you doing something? Why aren't you arresting her?
Yeah.
It was
Confusion
it was-
reigned.
Yes,
Oh.
there was so many.
Because you
issues.
think she shouldn't be doing that. She's spreading paint all over the road. And it's like, but someone's already put paint all over the road.
Yeah.
So, I don't
And
know.
then she's a black
I
person
didn't even know how to feel
protesting
about it.
the Black Lives Matter. And then you've got black people telling the police to arrest this person. Why aren't you doing something?
Incredible
Like
irony.
all of
isn't it?
the issues are kind of wrapped up in a crazy scene.
It's like one
in
of those
New York.
situations where in a movie where everyone's at a standstill with guns pointed at each other, and it's like,
Yes.
what do we do now?
Yes, yeah. It was very
You've got to
strange.
watch it. It's great.
Sounds
You
hilarious.
get a good
Yeah.
laugh out of that.
Yeah. So
On a very serious topic, but it's
yeah.
still funny.
Right, we've been going a while. Do we want to kind of? It's over an hour and a half. Is there anything that you wanted to cover that I've sent in the notes that you really?
Oh,
like
the
to cover?
chaplains one was a good one. I thought
Okay.
that's worth talking about.
Navy chaplains.
Navy chaplain, yeah.
Yeah. So,
This guy's a hero.
so this came from the National Secular Lobby, and testimony has been given by one of Australia's Defence Force
Not one of, the
no.
leading, I think it said.
top chaplains.
Top chaplain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has brought into question the employment of solely religious chaplains in Australia's military. In evidence given to the Defence Force Remuneration Tribunal, Navy Director General Chaplaincy and Principal Chaplain Colin Acton said that theological degrees did little to prepare religious chaplains for the provision of pastoral care required in the modern Australian Defence Force. And basically it goes on where he said that they're basically doing sort of non-religious pastoral care.
And well-being support.
Yes. And the type of care we regularly deal with includes such issues as relationship breakdown, family and domestic violence, anxiety, depression, suicide, and the wider complexities around members having trouble at work, finding it difficult to make friends, etc. And there is little in a theology degree that prepares a chaplain for the practical, pastoral and mental health related issues. And exactly the same things will be happening in our schools, where they're not allowed to proselytise. They're supposed to be dealing with similar sorts of issues of relationships and family breakdowns and all those things. And a theology degree is not helpful.
Doesn't help. Yeah.
Not at all.
Yep. So
What a
We need-
surprise.
More people like Colin Acton in the world.
At least he's being
Saying it
honest.
how it
He's
is,
being
yeah.
extremely honest, yeah.
all right. Okay. Well, I've got other stuff on the list, but we'll get to it next time, I think, to keep this manageable. If before the next episode, which, dear listener, now, I think while I'm away, I might record one while I'm on a boat. I don't know. We'll see what happens, depending how many books I get through. So anyway, there might be an episode late next week, or there might be one not until 2 weeks' time. Just have to wait and see. So we'll see what happens.
Are you taking Pinker with you onto the boat?
No, because I've got to have the internet
have
with me
internet
when
with
I'm
you.
reading Pinker.
Oh,
Because
right,
I
of
have
course.
to check his footnotes.
Is there no internet on the boat?
No,
Oh.
no internet.
What kind of
Yep,
self-respecting friend have you got with
Yeah.
a boat with no
yeah,
internet?
yeah. So I'm looking forward to being out on the internet, actually. So yes, there may or may not be a podcast next week. If there is, it'll be late. And then, anyway, we'll be back Tuesday the following week. So, yes.
Sounds like
All
a
right.
plan.
All right. Until then, dear listener, thanks for hanging in there. Talk to you next time.
I'll see you in a fortnight.
That
Bye
was
now.
fun. Hope